I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcade Mark.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Welcome to Arcade Mark. Today we're going to be talking about breaking into the tabletop role-playing game industry.
That's right. How many people here are already in the tabletop role-playing game industry? You can send a chat. I am. Linda is. All right.
Obviously, yes.
And how many people in chat would like to be in the tabletop RPG industry? Send a message in chat for that as well. We'll get a good sense of the room. Mm-hmm. But today we're going to talk about how to break into the tabletop RPG industry. So there's a lot of sense that the tabletop RPG industry is difficult to break into because it is small. It's relatively tight-knit, and there are very few people who are able to do it full-time as their only job, partially because it is a very low-profit industry.
Sweet. One of our viewers is in the middle of creating a game. That's awesome.
That's outstanding. I like it when people design games. That is very cool. So, if you want to break into the industry, basically, it's important to consider what your on-ramp is. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who've made it pretty far into the industry have told their stories, and some of these stories are pretty disparate from each other, and they don't follow, like, traditional breaking into the tabletop RPG industry
also, like,
standards.
This isn't one of those industries where people are like, yes, if you want to go into the tabletop RPG industry, what you should do is you should go to a school and get a degree in tabletop role-playing games. Like, no. People come from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of life experiences, and that's part of what makes content so rich, is that people draw upon what they know to enliven what they create.
That's right. Like, within about a year of my joining the Pathfinder design team at Paizo, which creates the core rules of the game, we had me with my computer science degree, where I left my PhD at MIT in computer science to join there. We had an architecture degree, a fine arts degree, a philosophy degree, and the one who left to get for the position that I took was chemical engineering. So it's like, it's all over the place. And to be in the tabletop RPG industry, it's about passion and it's about ideas more so than it's about, like, you need to have an English degree. So I was talking about the fact that there's all sorts of different paths. There's no one standard path. That being said, it's definitely hard mode to try to get in, having not written very much for the industry. And even then, I had done a lot of volunteer GMing for Paizo. Oh, your internet froze while watching Roll for Combat 2 RPG Gamerus? That is funny.
Yeah, no, this is new. I haven't seen blue screens on my computer before, and that's now my third one today, so.
It is. Yes, it's definitely a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, a bunch of people just popped up. So,
hey!
There we go. Welcome. We're hoping not to get another blue screen of death. So, in general, if you want to write for the tabletop RPG industry, you should not shoot for the king. Like, you shouldn't just be like, I'm going to write and I'm going to immediately write for Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or something like that. It's very difficult to do so unless they put out an open call, in which case they might be asking for, like, very specifically someone who fits exactly your area of expertise or something like that. There's like, we need someone who has expertise in, like, Suriname mythology, and you're like, I really know about Suriname mythology, and then it's like, okay, then that might be a situation where you're going to make it work.
There's also, like, if a company has, like, literally a hiring process or something like that, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do a blind test, then that's how that's part of how Mark got in. But
that's true.
But that does also point to the fact that it's good to have experience that comes from experience with the games that you want to write for, not just as a player but as a GM too. Because the more that you GM and the more that you GM for different people, the more that you can see the different ways that people interact with the game and create high quality content.
I agree with that, but I also have to say that from what I have seen of top high-level companies, the line on your resume of like I have GM'd for 20 years or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which actually that's a lot of years. I
Yeah.
think that is something to be proud of, but the level to which high level like company processes consider that to be prestigious is not that much, basically. So like if you have had 20 years of experience GMing and then you like and I homebrew wrote like this like 2000 magic items for my home game and the other person had 4 years of experience GMing, did not homebrew write anything for their game and worked at another RPG company for 2 years, that's going to be at most top companies considered drastically a stronger resume.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's gonna stand on its own for like applying for a
Oh
job
yeah,
or whatever, but it is something that's important to get yourself the experience in the first place.
that's right. And so what we're transitioning into, which also Dustin, considering Warlock, is saying in chat as well, is that you don't need to shoot for the moon or shoot for the king, in which case you best not miss. But instead, you can just write for yourself, publish it on Pathfinder Infinite or Starfinder Infinite or the DM's Guild for Dungeons and Dragons. You can self-publish on there. Do you give up a huge percentage of the money from the sales? You do, but you get to use certain stock art for free on
and
Pathfinder
intellectual
Infinite.
property as well.
Intellectual property helps somewhat, but getting the art, if you're just starting out, art is expensive and you will lose money on your third-party product, most likely because of art. Even if you give your labor for free and you lay it out for free and you don't use InDesign and you get a free tool for it, you will still probably lose money on the art on your first third-party product that you self-publish. So if you can get that for free on Infinite, then half of some amount of money is better than negative money.
Yes.
So that is something that is valuable to think about. Plus, it's a marketplace that people will look at. You can also, if you have a great idea for something to write, pitch it to a third-party company that is not Paizo, is not Wizards of the Coast, just any of the third-party companies that you know of. Pitch it to a few. If you pitch to 3 third-party companies and you have a good idea, chances are one of those 3 companies will hire you to do your idea. Unless your idea is just so incredibly long of an idea that it's like it would be a major amount of work for them to even have to deal with laying out and editing your idea. Especially since some third-party companies pay commissions instead of a per-word rate. So for them, their only cost is they've got to lay it out and put it out there, and if it sells, it sells. So try a few different third-party companies, and honestly, you'll probably find one that's willing to publish you if you have a good idea. Use third-party companies and Pathfinder Infinite to build up your resume.
As far as a place to connect with others who are freelancers or who are interested in freelancers, Numbet mentions a great opportunity in chat, Freelance Forge. If you Google Freelance Forge, it looks like it's the first hit. It's boards for freelancers in the tabletop RPG industry.
Absolutely. So you can find spaces like that to talk to other freelancers and build up your resume on freelance, because that is going to get you sorted into a top pile. Like a top pile. If you've written freelance third-party stuff for like that game, the exact same game that you're trying to apply for a full-time job. Now, when we say breaking into the industry, we are sort of conflating whether you're applying for a full-time job or you just want to write anything. If you just want to write anything, then even just writing for the third-party company, you've already broken into the industry.
And I'd say, too, that like if you're
that's
reaching
actually
out
very
to...
easy compared to working for Paizo or Wizards.
And if you're reaching out to someone looking for work, it's a good idea to give them some sense of the kinds of things that you're interested in, so they can have a sense of what kinds of projects and other ideas, as well as what your experience is. So they can know, like, hey, did you, there's a big difference between, like, oh, yeah, if I get, like, an email about an interested freelancer, someone just like, yeah, I want to write for Paizo, I like Paizo, versus someone who's like, I would be interested in creating short-form adventure content, and I'm most interested in, like, Ustalav and the Lands of the Linorm Kings and Kadira, but I'd be happy to do adventures anywhere, or something like that. Then you get a sense of what a person likes to... I give you adventure-related examples, because that's my my
Sure.
sphere. But you get a
I
good
mean,
sense
you
of
are
like,
the
what people,
Overleshy of narrative.
yeah, what they might like to work on, because it gives you a sense of like, hey, you know, this is what this person's interested in. And it's like, and then I've written for, you know, Kobold Press, and I also wrote this thing for, Legendary Games or whatever, and here's what I've got.
That's right. So Falco Rhiannon asks, how much weight does something like publishing as part of Zine Quest have? So from what I've seen and what I've heard across multiple top companies, if you have done something that is in terms of, I did full game design in a game that is completely unrelated to the game I'm trying to work on now. First of all, you've already broken into the industry overall, but if you're trying to break in specifically with, like, say, Pathfinder, or specifically with Dungeons and Dragons, and you published in Zine Quest, or really any other, like, really unrelated RPG, there's sort of, that puts you at a generally, I would say that from what I've heard people talking about things, probably in a better place than someone who's just like, I've run this game for a lot of years. Even though I personally think that someone who GM'd the exact same game for 20 years probably has picked up a lot of skills that someone who wrote a game that was completely unrelated might not have. I think it puts you in a better place, but that, like, I published once in Zine Quest is probably, like, more to the bottom end of that spectrum compared to, like, I wrote for 10 years on this other like, let's say you wrote for 10 years on World of Darkness. And you've never played, like, Pathfinder 2nd edition or written anything for it, or for D&D 5e, you played it a little, you have very little experience, but you wrote for 10 years on World of Darkness versus have very little experience, but I wrote one time for Zine Quest. They're sort of, they live in the same realm from what I've seen of people talking about stuff, but it would be, like, lower down on that realm.
And people, when they're looking to recruit authors, have sort of a different standards for whether they want to see samples and things like that. One thing to absolutely be sure is, don't send samples from work that you have done that's under an NDA that has not yet been published. Just don't do that. For sure.
It's actually, sending samples is very challenging and tricky.
Yeah.
It's a good idea because people want to see your samples. But there's like a 99.99% chance that your sample thing is either under NDA or it's, like, illegal because the other person owns it, so you're just sending text that somebody else owns that isn't under NDA. So standard practice, which I just have taken the disadvantage and not put anything in there. But I've heard that standard practice is that some people still do put things from published products. They sometimes ask, they're like, hey, third-party person, is it okay if I do a snippet from this thing that I gave for you when I'm applying to somewhere else? And they will generally be likely to allow it. I know some people try to sneak it by without checking, which I wouldn't do personally. I've heard that is one of the many ways that certain categories of job applicants who don't want to break the rules, which is like me, but also is typically more likely to be people who are from, like, marginalized groups who don't want to break the rules, get disadvantaged in that way because someone else will just be like, oh yeah, give me an NDA for this hiring process so that you won't tell anybody that I told you this, and I'll just tell you all this stuff.
Yeah. Because of that sort of because of both that disparity, and also the fact that you have to be, as someone who's receiving work, you have to be careful too, because if you because, like, let's say that you have something that you came up with and it hasn't been published, and then you send it into a company, and someone else at that company independently has an idea that's somewhat similar to yours later on, then the company has to be careful that you're not like, oh my gosh, I hope that, like, they're not going to sue us because they're saying that we stole their idea because they happen to send something in that is that's more similar, which is why in, like, a lot of open calls and contests and stuff like that, you'll see language that
it's like we own it no matter whether we do anything or not.
Speaking of contests, there is a certain superstar.
Yes, I was going to get into that, and that was an excellent segue, because here's how to break into the RPG industry. If you're like, oh, but I don't want to lay out my own stuff, I don't want to have to network and talk to these third-party third-party companies, right? Well, how about this? Go to rpgsuperstar.com and just write a monster. Write up to 3 monsters. Just go. There's an online monster creator that helps you find the numbers, so you don't even have to do it. It like guides you through. So just write a monster, write 2, write 3. Read the rules. Like, there are some guidelines, like not putting in Golarian lore that is not owned and not making the monsters connected to each other. And this year they have to have some elements from a weird element list. So do read the rules, but just submit. If you do, then Roll for Combat, who I work for as the director of game design, so you'll have me as your developer on this. We're going to polish up your monster and publish it in Battlezoo Bestiary with your name on the page, which rarely happens when you're in a Bestiary book. Like, if you do something for D&D Monster Manual or Paizo Bestiary, your name will not be on the page. It'll be on a gigantic list of like 60 names in the table of contents.
And there's a lot of winners for that contest, right? Like,
it's like 137 winners or something like that. Although some of them may be the same person if you submit 3 and you win 3 times. So doesn't mean there's 137 different people who win. But yeah, RPG Superstar is a fantastic way to get to break into the industry because there's basically no barrier of entry. Assuming you are that GM who homebrewed 300 monsters over 20 years, this should be a snap. And if you've homebrewed really good monsters over 20 years, like, it is a competitive contest. A lot of people submit, but it's not like ridiculously competitive contest. Like, it's like it was something like 1 in 4 to 5 won a prize or something like that last year, maybe slightly better than that. And it's probably going to be harder this year because I think there are going to be more submissions. But to get into that top percentage and win a prize, if you're someone who's highly experienced at writing monsters, is like being at least on the threshold of getting copper is something that's very achievable. And we see that because the really strong monster creators have some of them have won, like, have submitted 6 monsters. There's been 2 of them so far, so 3 each year, and they won all 6.
Yeah.
So, like,
and they're anonymous, so
so I guess what I'm saying is, if you've got the skills, you have a very good chance of winning an RPG Superstar.
And that also gets to another point, is like when you're starting with your first project, it's good to look for something smaller scale.
Yeah,
you know,
like a monster.
Yeah, a company that's hiring you is likely going to want to hire you for something smaller scale, and also that makes it a lot easier not to get overwhelmed with the scope of the project. So, you know, a few thousand words or less, I'd say, would be a good starter size. Certainly don't want to be like, yes, I'm going to start with an adventure path, or like any of these like giant tens of thousands of words. Those kinds of projects really take a lot of piecing. And
whereas 1,000 words is something that many freelancers can just do on a weekend day.
Yeah.
Or faster.
Speaking as someone who's reviewed work from people and work to build people, it has been a little while since I've been this directly involved in that, since I do more managerial stuff nowadays. But it really is good to work and build up someone's skills from small to larger, because also if you're someone who is on the side of like giving someone feedback and helping to mentor them, and they've sent you like a giant assignment, then it's a lot harder to approach it if it's like, here's a giant assignment and then like here's the things I like and here's the things to work on to change. Then if it's like a small assignment, it's much easier to be more communicative throughout the process and adapt things.
That's true. Plus 1,000 words call out through the ages.
There you go. Final Fantasy reference.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely true, start smaller. It's easier just in general to do so, and a monster is a great way to start small while still showing off a strong variety of your skills in a way that's not going to cause you to be dinged for some small thing about power balance, in the same way that magic items, which used to be RPG Superstar back in the past when Paizo ran the contest, and for me, a lot of people who had pretty creative ideas, it was just like, yeah, but this magic item is broken, and so they lost, they would lose points from me as a judge.
Yeah. So I'd say that one thing to consider when submitting content too is a pitfall that a lot of newer authors fall into is assuming that more complicated equals better. in many
I've definitely
cases,
seen that in pitches where
yeah,
it's like, pitch an adventure. Okay, in this adventure, you're going to go on a chase that leads you into a research subsystem, during which time you have to do an infiltration. And it's like, this was supposed to be a 1-hour quest.
hmm
What have you done?
yeah. So so you know, getting across it's oftentimes more impressive to get across interesting ideas more simply, and if you can make them mechanically simpler, that causes you to have more room to flesh out the story or add other content that's valuable.
And I understand the impulse. It's like, I did a perfectly formatted chase and research and infiltration, which are hard to do well, and show that I understand those subsystems, and that shows off my skills and how I can write this complex thing and it fit in the word count.
Yeah.
And like, I get that there's this idea to show off, but you're actually showing off more by making something that is more elegant.
Thank you so much for the gift subs.
Yes, thanks everyone for the gift subs and the hype train.
Yes, indeed, the hype train continues. So yeah, if you can make that simpler, and if you want to have like one thing if you want to have a flourish, stick to one flourish, and that way you're not like scattershotting things, like, you know, having one monster that's got a more complicated ability, or like, you know, one subsystem that's well implemented and is really core to the adventure or the contents. Because if you're thinking about it from the perspective of like, what is this going to be like as a player or a GM, like, players and GMs aren't going to want to flourish is once returned for a reason. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, perfect. You put too many
Dustin
spices
says
in
if
the
you
stew,
fail the infiltration, you need to do a debate subsystem for the guard and influence the guard. Oh no.
Yes, pick one spice from your spice drawer. Don't just like dump them all in the crock pot.
That's right.
And you'll get better content.
The problem is, like, it is legitimately can still be a challenge if you're in an open call to stand out. So I understand the reason why you might try to do that, because if you submit something that doesn't stand out, you might not be like insta rejected, like the whatever, or chase into a research, into an infiltration, to a debate.
Yeah.
If you fail the infiltration, but you might wind up in the like maybe pile that then doesn't get taken. So
yeah. Like, I
tricky.
submitted something years back, I'm forgetting what company it was for at this point, where I submitted an adventure that was more straightforward, and they were like, yeah, there's not enough, it doesn't have enough flair. Because I was like that was like well before Paizo stuff, when I was beginning to try breaking in, but...
I can't remember. I know one of your things in Wayfinder, all of your things got accepted except for the one that didn't actually quite follow the rules, and they still wanted to accept it, but they couldn't find something to pair it with, because you were supposed to do like an ally and an enemy, and you submitted an idea for only an enemy or something like that. And they were like, they sent an apologetic thing. It was before you were at Paizo, that was like, we really, really like this enemy, but we don't have an ally to go with.
Follow the instructions.
Also. So do follow the instructions.
Yeah, but like that's why I think like sort of the one flourish is a good way to.
Yeah, Casey Lewis is like, would it be bad to write a goblin for RPG Superstar that's a well-designed goblin? No, not necessarily. The Goblin Circus Troupe, which was a troupe of circus goblins, was one of the winners from last year. So, absolutely, like, being a goblin can get you a hook, because they're actually a popular ancestry. Yeah. The thing of not being able to stand out, and maybe you say goblin, but maybe you meant, like, human. Like, would a human be a bad choice? And, like, a human would be a bad choice for RPG Superstar, because, like, it's a human. I mean, I say that, but I'm sure you can come up with, like, a weird ascended human or some weird thing involving humans that might work out.
Having some sort of ability that's unique, and by unique, we don't mean, like, you know, one of the things we've talked about before with monster design, about, like, if you just create an ability that's extremely similar to an existing ability, then that's not necessarily adding more to the space of what kinds of stuff is out there. It's more like an experienced person who's reading your stuff isn't going to think, oh, they came up with a clever spin on this. They might think, oh, I guess they don't know this ability already exists. Or, like, go and change it to the thing that's very close. So, looking for using architecture that always exists is really great to build off of, because then you can get a lot of bang for your buck by using sort of those existing monster rules and just saying, oh yeah, you know, this monster, it has grab on its attack. You don't have to then go in and define all that stuff.
That's true. And Dustin said, remember that designing a balanced mundane gear is often more impressive to experienced developers than designing a balanced level 20 relic.
That's certainly
That's true. It's for sure true. Like, I remember, like, when Dustin submitted a thing with mundane gear that was balanced, that was good, and he was like, I'm not sure about this, because, you know, spring-loaded wrist sheaths are always busted, but I've tried to put in something here. And then the question was, like, should we put one in that's, like, pretty weak just so it exists and nobody tries to make it again later, or should we just not because it's just so ridiculous? And that was just a really balanced mundane gear section that showed off his skills and was very impressive. Kitchef asks, how hard is it for someone new to Pathfinder 2 to learn monster design? So, I would say that when you're trying to learn monster design in Pathfinder 2, that I'm obviously, don't take my word for it, like in Reading Rainbow, because, like, I worked together with Logan to make the rules of monster design, and I, in my biased opinion, think that it is easy to learn, vastly easier to be able to make a good monster from it than using the Dungeon Master Guide rules from 5e, because they are the same rules that Paizo makes. The same rules that Paizo uses to make monsters, pretty much. So it guides you from your concept through, helps you pick numbers, and the only thing that I would say is a concern is not that the rules for making monsters would be hard if you don't know anything about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but that if you don't know anything about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, like, you might not have the context to understand what you're doing. The rules actually still are very specific, and Elftrail has a link for building a creature rules right there. On Archives of Nethys, they're free. But it'll tell you very specifically what to do, but
like,
you might be like...
use numbers from this chart based on... These are sort of the ranges for this level that you might expect. And there's,
I would actually even suspect that someone who didn't even know what Pathfinder 2 was could probably get numbers that worked using that Build a Creature rules. And RPGSuperstar.com, you can even just say, my roadmap is a brute monster. It'll autofill some suggested numbers for you. So you don't even have to spend any time to get suggested numbers that are at least somewhat right.
Where it starts to get a little trickier is when you get into, like, if you're not familiar with the game, is when you get into things like abilities and considering what the balance of those abilities.
That's
is.
exactly
Like,
where I was going to contrast.
Should an ability take 1 actions to use, 2 actions to use, or 3 actions to use? And should it be something that they can sort of keep doing over and over again? Because generally, the more actions something takes to use, the more limited it is, the more powerful that it can be. If you've got something that's 1 action, then it can just be done over and over and over again. Another thing to consider...
also, things that the numbers might not show you directly is the numbers will be like, this much damage. But if you have the ability like Double Slice, the PC ability that lets you attack twice with no multiple attack penalty... The expectations of damage are that if they attack, they would just be attacking one at a time with a multiple attack penalty. If you can do that, you obviously need to... Well, maybe not obviously, because I've seen things like our GM in one of the APs ran a fan conversion of Pathfinder 1st Edition AP that was pretty good and used the rules correctly, but the rules don't say that you need to use a different damage number if you have a meta strike that gives you better accuracy, but you do, and they didn't, so they would double strike, and each one would do the full damage for the level.
A good thing that I find to like think about for that is if you there's guidelines for Rico just said literally what I was about to say. Awesome. That a roguelike, that there's guidelines for, like, if you want to make an NPC that's like a rogue, so they have like damage.
Well, that one at least is in there.
Yeah. But I know that one's in there, but I think gives a good idea of, like, the kinds of things that you think about, is that a roguelike NPC is going to be doing kind of, like, low or moderate damage, but then if they get the sneak attack, then they're going to be doing, like, higher extreme damage. So
sure, but the rules actually directly tell you that when you're making a rogue, whereas they don't directly say, if you have the ability for 1 action to make 4 attacks that all have no penalty, then it needs to do less damage.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that, like, in the same vein that, like, you can use that as sort of a way to start thinking about, like, okay, yeah, you know, if there's some kind of a situational thing that could happen that would let you do more damage than expected, then there's going to be some kind of a counterbalance.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you use, like, logic compared to the rules that are actually in there to try to think about it, then you might be able to figure it out. But at the point where you've done that, it may be hard for someone who doesn't really know Pathfinder 2. Whereas I really do think if you don't even know the game at all, you probably still can read that and at least come up with numbers that are on the table, which may not be the correct numbers, as we've been saying here. The table is not the be-all and the end-all. But let's see. Ultra points out that if you find monsters that are similar to your monster, you can refluff them with slight ability changes and call it a day. And that's absolutely true. So if you're like, oh, I have a regenerating starfish monster, I'll just start with a troll. And it probably shouldn't have rend because it's a starfish, so I'll give it some other weird spin starfish attack and all around vision because it's got symmetry.
Yeah.
And maybe its regeneration is different because fire doesn't work underwater, and I'll change what makes it lose its regeneration. But you can do that, and then you've got it. Like, if it's supposed to be the same level as a troll, you're probably done. Like, yeah. I just literally, in one run-on sentence, designed it.
And yeah, the low-level stuff is generally going to be a lot simpler than the high-level stuff in terms of the number of extra abilities that you add on, but sort of the base chassis of just like, oh, there's numbers is the same level of complexity.
It looks like Rico's seen people complain about a prominent AP boss online because they didn't read that in the guidelines. Yeah, that's fair. I've seen problems where even published adventures that aren't fan conversions sometimes accidentally use also the values that are directly on the table, and do not take those things into account. Like, it is easy to be lured by the siren song of those tables.
Yeah.
As one, the person who helped come up with the math for those tables, I apologize about their siren song, but I do think they're helpful to getting you started.
And if you have a creature similarly that has something that's really, really odd in some way, like, for example, an ooze with, like, absolutely terrible armor class. Look for examples of other creatures that are odd in that way, and then you can see, oh yeah, well, oozes have absolutely terrible armor class, but they also have, like, a lot more hit points. Or like zombies have an absolutely gigantic weakness, but they also have like
they have pretty bad armor.
And they have pretty bad armor class, so they've got a lot more hit points and things. That's right.
Like that. And they're slow. They have a lot of reasons.
So like the more that you have one number that jumps off of the scale, the more your other numbers might need to jump off of the scale to compensate.
That's right. And Kitchev, who asked that question originally, is saying that they read the rules but haven't been in a game yet and want to run a few games first. Well, there's actually a lot of time on RPG Superstar. I think it's not due until like mid-May. So you got time. You can run a few games and then write your 3 monsters. Or you can preliminarily write your monsters, not submit them, and then run a few games where you run the monsters in the games for your players and make them fight your horrific monsters. Like, I heard that the winner who made the Emperor Shark Penguins last year did run playtests with the Emperor Shark Penguins with their group, and to make sure that it worked. And, then you submit after, if your playtest that you run in your game might make you want to change what's going on.
And Rico's saying that as we mentioned, the action economy is super important. The standard action in D&D is 2 actions, and PF2E is it's a solid kind of shorthand in terms of the idea.
It's not that far off.
Yeah, because 2 actions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is like the thing that you can do while also like drawing a weapon or moving or something like that. Whereas 3 actions is like you're just standing there and this is exactly what you're doing. And 1 action is like, oh, this is a thing that you can fire off very flexibly.
That's right. And Tony, I do think zombies are fun. Like, when I was creating a small sampling of monsters in the early alpha to be like, what does a monster even look like? One of the first things I made was a zombie and a skeleton to just... The zombie shambler and the original skeleton's like, they're the same level, but look, the skeleton has like no hit points, resistances, and high AC, and the zombie has low AC and is slow with just way more hit points than it's supposed to have at its level. And that was popular even from then, and was I think a good way to work with the action economy and with weaknesses and resistances as I was proposing at that point in time. Because the old way of doing it was damage reduction back in Pathfinder First. So let's see. And Dustin says, start writing tonight and just create something, even if it's just Pokemon conversions. You can
And talk about posting on our Pathfinder 2e creations for feedback too.
Yeah,
there's there's a big community.
There's lots of places. There's just like some people post things just on r/Pathfinder 2e flat out. I mean, some people post homebrew on Arcane Mark Discord. I mean, not a lot, but this is Arcane Mark, so I might as well talk about our good old friend tiny.cc/Arcane Mark, which is our Discord. Yep, and you can put it anywhere with time to spare.
Yeah. Another thing, you know, you can post it anywhere, and another kind of experience that helps is drawing on your experience engaging with a variety of different media and, you know, fantasy/science fantasy stories, you know, other RPGs that you played, like shows that you've watched, books that you've read, all sorts of stuff. Those kinds of things can help inform what you do. Not that you're gonna be, you know, of course, just copying what you've already seen, but you can get a lot of inspiration from the stories that have really resonated with you.
That's right. All sorts of places where you can just talk to people and figure things out. Rico says one of them numerically sounds a lot
Probably
higher.
Infinite possibilities.
Infinite, yes.
There you go.
I would say that does seem like it has more possibilities since it's numerically infinite. So yeah, basically, it's actually fairly challenging to write for Paizo or WotC, but it's pretty easy to get started, and there's actually very little stopping you from getting started.
Let's see. Question: do you find over your career you end up being a bit better with specific type of monsters or adventure paths, or end up well spread through genres and contents? I mean, you get better at what you practice the most. But I would say that, you know, working in adventures, I've found that I've gotten to practice a lot of different aspects of working, of, you know, between like adventure balancing and mechanics and different formats of adventures and things like that. But, you really do get better with what you practice. Like I do have some, I'm decent at Starfinder, but I'm definitely better at Pathfinder 2nd edition because that's what I have more experience with.
I would say that Linda has just understands adventures so well. I would say my strongest points are not even always in the things that I have worked on the most recently, but parts of Pathfinder 2 that I heavily designed, like, most of, I tend to be good at writing things for because I'm like, well, I designed this and I understand what I'm doing. And, or like, for instance, like the spells, where I did a ton of trying to figure out like what levels the spells should be, including moving some of them. Obviously, the whole design team weighed in. There were lots of passes, but I had to do a lot of benchmarking. So it's easier for me to think of things in terms of spells. So even when I'm designing something that isn't spells, like a magic item, I sometimes think of the benchmark spell using magic items. So it's like, oh, well, you know, this item is a permanent item with a once per day ability. Well, it could have a 6th level spell in there. I'll make sure the ability is around a 6th level spell because it's easier for me to know what that is than what a 13th level item would do.
Yeah.
So in that respect, I would say that in that respect, I would say that that people do have certain specialties that they know about things for.
There's a question about what percentage of monsters use spells. I don't know
and
off the top of my head.
I don't know, but they say, would that make you less likely to get picked in RPG Superstar? I will tell you this, okay? I personally think that the major spellcasting monsters, I know that Linda agrees with this, the ones that are like, I'm the Lich, look at my 70 spells that you'll never use and that make it hard to run, are actually make the monster worse. And I will probably be more critical about it, although if the concept obviously needed you to have that, I'm not going to just flat out subtract things right away from you, but I don't like them when they have a ton. But if you have like 1 or 2 spells, or even like 4 or 5 that are thematic for in-combat usage where it's like, I'm mainly using these spells, or out of combat to tell the story about the monster, that's fine. Cool. That's good. It's better than rewriting the exact text of the spell as a long ability and using up all your words.
I consider the spells to fall into the same bucket as all other abilities with how many things are competing for the monster's actions. Because the typical thought is, a creature isn't necessarily going to survive more than 3 rounds of contact with the PCs. So if you have content that's going to be like, oh yeah, well, I don't know what I want to do with their reaction because they've got 3 different reactions, or they've got 17 different things they could do that each take 2 actions. That's just going to bog things down for the GM to be reading through all that. So when you're doing spells, also make sure that spells are going to be useful to them. If a spell is a damaging spell, or a spell with the incapacitation trait, and it's way lower level than the creature, is it an action they're actually going to want to use? And for combat type things, and then for utility type things, does it really matter for the story that they have that ability? Mm-hmm. And if it does, it's oh yeah, this NPC is able to, this creature represents providing refuge to those in difficult and desolate locations, so they can create water and create food and things like that, and make a little shelter. I'd also say watch for the level of the effects you're giving, that they're not necessarily higher than the level of the creature, because that can create some wonky stuff from balance too. But having a few thematic spells is a great way to avoid rewriting the same text.
Let's see. People were talking about Matt Kavanaugh, who did a Leshy a week on Reddit for a while, and then launched that into Kickstarters.
Mm-hmm.
And
the technical bestiary is cool.
Several people who are around here also worked on the second one, Gardener's Guide to Gaming, because Linda wrote Heritages for Botanical Bestiary. Mm-hmm. Linda and I wrote some archetypes for Gardener's Guide to Gaming, and then Tony, who's in the chat, also wrote for Gardener's Guide to Gaming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Jess too?
Yep, yeah, Jessica Radicop also wrote for that. There are a lot of people who wrote for Gardener's Guide, whereas Matt himself wrote, I think, pretty much everything for the first Botanical Bestiary, except the Heritages that Linda wrote as a stretch goal to add famous known over Leshy, Linda Zayas Palmer.
Oh my god.
What? You were a stretch goal.
Yeah, you're right. I was a stretch goal.
And you are
a
famous known over Leshy.
So I got to write for it, and it was fun. People know that Leshies are a way to bribe me to write stuff, but
yes,
there was
that's why they said in the chat that you're the greatest of all time, Linda.
Aw. Well, we did eventually hit a point where there would have been an opportunity for me to write something Leshy related recently, and I turned it down because I'm too busy.
Yep. But, I mean, you already wrote so many Leshy things.
So the principle doesn't always continue.
People also recently saw that you've written even more Leshy things because there was an announcement of one of your Leshy-related products.
Mm-hmm.
Rico wrote nothing but pays money for Leshy.
Hey, you know what? We appreciate that.
The legendary Leshy literary liaison.
Accounting Bear, creature 3.1. Stats, and Grizzly Bear plus occult innate spell approximate.
Oh, yeah, but the Accounting Bear also needs quick sort.
Yes,
Just in case.
Is that going to be Susie from accounting?
So, Altro points out you get money for RPG Superstar, and that the lowest prize is I think the lowest prize for copper is a little bit less than the lowest amount that Paizo pays. However, the silver prize is higher than the minimum that Paizo pays. And the gold prize is, I think, much higher than the maximum that Paizo pays, if you're doing it per word. I think that technically the platinum don't get any better rate, but they get more volume because of the fact that you get to write a whole family for your monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Elf says if you write 600 words, it's lower, but if you're closer to 500, it's the same. You might be right. I thought it was still a little bit less, but that's the copper, and it's for a sort of just a submission contest that anybody can submit, which I still think is very good. That it's close toward, it's getting towards a low Paizo rate and is higher than other other freelance rates that give really low rates. And 500 words, it does get to around 5 cents a word, Elf. However, Paizo's lowest rate is above that.
Yes.
That's what it is. You're right about what it is. Paizo just has a higher lower rate than that. But the silver price already is not as high as Paizo's highest rate, but it is at a pretty good rate for Paizo.
Paizo's minimum rate nowadays is 9 cents a word.
Yes. Whereas the silver is above that. The latest time Eric publicly spoke about it, it was 5. Must have been a very long time ago.
That would have been, gosh, that would have been before
I remember
my time.
Eric publicly speaking about it recently and saying that it was
7
higher
cents
than
was
5.
the,
7 was the highest,
minimum
was the minimum for many years, and it didn't raise.
And then it went to 8, and then it went to 9.
So I even remember Eric publicly speaking recently during a thing, and he did not say it was 5 cents. He said it was significantly above that. People were like trying to. Some person on Twitter or something claimed it was 5 cents, and Eric was like, "That must have been super long ago then, if you saw that." I remember seeing that, and it must have been super long ago.
Our first interaction with the rates was like 10 years ago, and it was 7 by then. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was that somebody claimed they got 5 cents, and Eric was like, "Wow, that must have been almost 20 years ago." But okay. Yeah, it was stuck at 7 for a very, very long time and required a lot of like talking and negotiating to get it to go up.
It's also true that org play scenarios used to pay less than everything else.
That is true because they didn't pay as percent. They paid a flat rate, and then there was a range of words.
Yeah, like when I first came on board, they paid like 3 or 4, and then we got them parity with the rest, and now the rest is in raising too.
That's right. But it was what worked out to 3 or 4, or sometimes higher if you wrote at the exact minimum or something like that. But many authors wrote at the max of their word count because scenarios, especially when you were first starting off, were pretty complicated and generally really needed you to write towards the max of the word count.
Yeah.
To like do the things that you were asked to do. So yeah, it's better now in that situation at Paizo. I still think for a contest that you submit with like no overhead or no having to get tapped, just like I'm just going to put it in that the bronze award is pretty good. I wouldn't give a freelancer that I asked that I'm like, I want you because you are awesome and I'm asking you to write this. I wouldn't give them the bronze rate because 5 cents a word I think is too low to give to somebody. But then again, I don't give rates at all because I'm a writer. Steven is the money guy, but I would give a contest winner that who won at the lowest tier of the contest, absolutely, because it was unsolicited. Generally, the copper prize results, I mean, they're strong for like a hobbyist who's just submitting in there, but they would be something I would for most of them. Just like for a freelancer, I'd be like, you could have done better than this. This required a lot of touch-up work compared to what I would expect from a professional freelancer. So,
but it's completely,
it works out pretty well.
But that's also like where people start off,
and
then
I'm
they get
impressed.
Feedback and they grow. Yeah.
I'm impressed that someone who's never done it before gets to the point where I wouldn't be like, "How could you even write this?" It would be more like, "No, this is below the standards I expect for a professional freelancer." Of course it is.
Yeah,
nobody's ever told you what to do.
Of course, right? Everybody's got to start somewhere.
Yep, absolutely. So I really highly recommend RPG Superstar, just writing your own stuff in Infinite if you're okay with self-publishing or approaching a third-party company, basically. That's my bottom line. You can try to shoot for the moon. I'm even probably an example of that, even though I did approach a few third-party companies and had a few things in the work, but Paizo, I don't think counted them much on my resume since only one of them had really actually published me at that point in time, so it didn't look like it was much. And Linda also did not have a lot of third-party credits either.
Yeah.
But just because that's true doesn't mean that you should, like, do what... For a long time, even before I did the third parties, I was thinking, like, I'll just go straight to working somewhere like Paizo. That was just sort of, like, my dream job. And that's not realistic, even though it can happen, is not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we did both have our MIT degrees, but I feel like in terms of what like, people spoke about that stood out to them on our stuff, I feel like a lot of it was about, like, the volunteering we'd done for organized play.
I would say that the volunteering probably, my guess, just from hearing from people who they told me a lot about my second stage and third stage, but not my first stage, is that probably the volunteering pushed me in the door of, like, probably I was like just for the heck of it, we'll throw this enthusiastic newbie into the people who take the tests. Because, that's the kind of thing companies sometimes do. We'll put in these 12 however many veterans and this one random newbie. Why not? But then I destroyed the test. And
destroyed.
Apparently. I don't know. I've never seen it, but I was told by multiple people, including people who weren't even on the team that hired me, who apparently looked at it, that my test result was very, very high. And so I got in off the test, really, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
But I made it into being able to take that test off of probably volunteering.
For me, my understanding was that had a bigger part, but I guess that was also because like they knew they needed a developer.
Well,
to
you also got the highest score on the test.
Yeah.
The time that you.
But
took
I mean,
it.
in terms of getting initial.
Also, they knew who you were.
Yeah.
Like literally as a human being, because you're my SO, so that helped them at least know. We know who Linda is, and you had freelanced a little for Paizo.
Yeah.
I had never written anything for them before, so you freelanced a little for it, and it was actually an incredibly difficult task to give to a new freelancer. And Patrick Rini, who did your thing, it seemed he was really impressed by it, but was like Linda's initial thing was expand the summon monster list to add all the possible monsters at appropriate levels. Not just based on just challenge rating, but look at the actual abilities that they have to make sure that it's appropriate.
I put so many comments in that. It's like
that is so hard.
That's
like one of the hardest freelance assignments of its size that I've even heard of being given to anyone. And
it was fun.
It was part of Linda's first freelance assignment for Paizo. Warlock Flash Beetle goes in every level. Oh my goodness.
More Flash Beetles.
Oh no. Apparently my test caused the other ones to light on fire. No! Summon Monster 9, Flash Beetle, 3d20 plus 5. So let's see. Tony suggests to rapidly improve, read as much material of the game you're designing as you feel you can reasonably consume. 2, write and get feedback, be open to changes. And 3, watch Arcane Mark regularly.
Aw, thanks.
So
we do talk a lot about this game.
I do feel like those 3 probably will help you. And especially if you get feedback from people who are maybe not like your closest friend group, who definitely want to, might be like, oh, but I'll feel bad if I say anything that's too critical because it might get you down. Then again, if you're the kind of person who could get demoralized by feedback that is asking for changes, you may want to avoid number 2, even though it would help you improve quickly, because it may hurt your motivation more than it helps you.
Or go to someone who you know is good at giving feedback and knows that you gotta balance the good with the bad.
Yes, but it's hard to find someone like that who both knows enough that they can give you that kind of feedback and knows how to do that, and you know that they know how to do that. So you know yourself and know whether or not you'll get, because it's obviously going to help your skills, but based on your personality, it may be something that like takes the wind out of your sails. It's like I don't know. My advisor at MIT tried to categorize between people like him, who are kind of like me in some ways, who, if you ask 10 people for something and you get rejected once, then you're like devastated by the person who said something nasty, and so you don't want to go out and ask. Even 100 people, the one nasty one sticks with you. Versus the people who ask 100 people for something and get 99 doors slammed in their face because they're asking for something like ridiculous, but then they just feel so amazing about the one person who said yes and who was nice to them. That's the only thing they remember.
I wonder what it would be like to be like that person.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm the person, a lot of people that I know, Linda, myself, my advisor, are the person who the one person saying something mean or slamming the door in your face sours everything.
I worry too that I'm just like that. If people don't say anything, it's like, are they just not giving me feedback? Whereas if somebody gives me like constructive critical feedback, it's like, okay, yes, now I know that they mostly like this thing, but here's something that I can build off of.
Rico hates losing more than liking winning and therefore plays co-op games. Looks like several of the people in the chat have done step 3 and watched Arcane Mark in the past.
There you go.
I think it's very surprising. It's almost as surprising as when Stephen Glicker did a poll that was in like the design stream for people who kickstarted the higher tier of Year of Monsters, that said, who here likes Year of Monsters enough that they would like even more monsters? And 100% of all of the people who were in that special exclusive stream only for the people who like monsters the most said that they did like monsters. Are you shocked? So bye YouTube, see you next time.
Bye.